Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Garfield County Libraries podcast. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rebecca.
And today we're going to be talking about graphic novels, but more specifically we're going to be talking about the first volume of Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe, a New Zealand artist. Lore Olympus started out as a webtoon, and I'm going to pass over to Rebecca to talk more about webtoons.
Yes, so webtoons are comics that are on web. However, it's not just comics. Ever since 2018, a little bit before then, I'd say maybe even 2013, considering I'm gonna make a really funny joke, and you gotta laugh. I'm just joshing. It's not gonna be a joke. It's just a funny mention to the past. Gangnam Style. Ever since then, I feel like there has been a very big shift within American culture and what they call now the new Korean wave instead of new wave, which is honestly really funny when you think about it, because
this is unfounded. Like, I don't have the research to back this, but from my personal experience of it, to me it was kind of a version of our like British invasion from the 60s.
Yeah.
When Gangnam Style became so popular, we just started having this fascination with Korean culture.
Yep.
In a really good way, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I think it really started to become a really big thing once BTS started, because you know it's the classic trope of what's going to bring in the new music, the new trend? Boy bands.
Boy bands, as always.
It's always going to be a boy band. And that's why a lot of Korean culture has transferred into American culture nowadays. It started with K-pop, and it went into K-dramas, and then after that it started to kind of merge with mangas, because in Korea they're not mangas exactly, they're manhwas.
Manga is a Japanese form of
Yes,
comics,
exactly.
So in the same time that we're getting this, Japanese manga started coming into the US in around the 90s, 80s and 90s.
80s and 90s, yeah.
Particularly with Shonen Jump, with things like Dragon Ball Z and some of the animes like that. Korean manhwas, however, are a different feeling to mangas.
Yeah.
Whereas mangas, particularly with shonen and shoujo, which are aimed at teen boys and teen girls, manhwas, from my experience, are a little bit more dramatic, just like K-dramas.
Yes.
Have a bit more of a focus on some more contemporary storylines.
Yes, 100%, especially with how you read them.
Yes.
That is a really great example right there, because mangas are going to be read in like how we read a book. It's going to be backwards.
And it's because kanji is read right to left.
Yes. And that's and manhwas are actually just traditional to the books. However, webtoons are not in any way related to books.
Yes.
It's on your phone, it's on your computer, it's all digital now. So this is the new age of comics and reading.
Yes.
Instead of having your mangas or your manhwas or your comic books, you're going to be having your webtoons, is what they are now called. But it was originally, I forgot what the original name was. But
oh goodness, I should. It wasn't Toonsplash, but it was something like that.
Yeah, I think it became webtoons around early to mid 2010s.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting how that's happened, because apparently webtoons have been around since the 90s.
Oh really?
Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And of course it originated in Korea.
Oh.
And Korea actually has a law, I can't remember exactly the law, and I should have written it down, but it's a law that allowed for publishers to support these sort of comics through digital publications instead.
That makes
sense. It's like very much early online reading, which amazing. It really opened up so many doors.
I had no idea, because with my own experience of webtoons going through high school is when I started getting into it myself. By then it was adapted for your smartphone. So to me, I always thought webtoons was something that was built for the smartphone, where you just scroll instead of flipping a page like you would on a Kindle.
Yeah.
But no, starting out earlier, that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think the coolest thing is how webtoons is, originally Korean, but it's in Korea. It's a part of like their search engine. It's a part of like that kind of like app style, and then because I've dabbled into like reading original Korean ones and using like the really terrible translations on my phone to like read them. I'm like, I need to know what happens next, because I'm gonna say it now, I love myself some webtoons, some manhwas, some mangas. I'm more of a manhwa girl though, because I really do love manhwas. They're so good. They're so great. But yeah, and it is wild that it started in the 90s and it's so big now. But I think the merge between mangas and manhwas began in the late 2000s actually. So that's because, of course, a lot of Asian culture does kind of merge with each other. So it wasn't just Japan, it was also China involved in this because they were also, they don't have they do have their own comic styles. Right?
Which is also called a manhwa, surprisingly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's manhwas. Manhwas. Which is, I mean, I love it.
Yes.
I love it.
Also have their own thing, but the unfortunate consequence of what's the word I want to use here? When you have cultures coming to a different foreign culture, when you don't have enough specificity, they do kind of blur together in that American blending pot way, or melting pot way. But that being said, there are some distinct characteristics, but one way or another, all of these different forms of graphic novel kind of got adapted for one platform.
Yeah, and Webtoon is actually just a website. It's not just what they're called. So I think that I'm going to be tagging in some apps if people are interested in manhwas, mangas, and comics.
Talking about just in general, before we get into Lore Olympus, just the general comic book history. Graphic novels are a wonderful thing. In more recent history, things that were purely online are getting physical copies, which is like what we talked about today. Lore Olympus is an example of that. But while graphic novels, at least in America, started getting a really big pull in the 50s and 60s with things like Marvel Comics and the DC Comics, graphic novels have existed in lots of different places, and the internet has been a great format for graphic novels to kind of take flight.
100%, yeah.
Talking about apps outside of just webtoons that you can get your graphic novels.
Yeah, there's Manta, there's Tapas. I call it Tapas. I know it sounds very Hispanic of me, but it's just that's how it sounds in my head, Tapas, even though it is. I'm pretty sure, I think Tapas is Korean as well. There's Tappy Toon, Tumic, webcomics, and Manga Plus. Manga Plus has it's the majority manga, but it does have manhwas in it. And it's what I was reading, a lot of these are legal. However, with any content, of course, when you come across anything that people really want to read, there are ways people can get to those, which is why it's always best to go to these originals, support the creators. Yes. If you really love that. But also, libraries are the best ways to get them too, because like Sarah said, they're being adapted. Instead of having comics now going into computers in your phones, now they're coming from your phones into your hand as a physical copy. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that libraries have give people access to, is just the fact that, I mean, I've told you the little manhwa that I've been very obsessed with. I love it so much, and the fact that I was able to find a physical copy that still has not been sent to me, but I'm waiting patiently. Like we do not in Garfield County have it, but there are other libraries in Colorado where you can have access to these books, and I think I can speak for both of us that we have seen so many people putting so many like mangas and manhwas on hold in bulk. You know,
we have not to specify patrons specifically, but but there will be times where we'll have a shelf that's just dedicated manga. We're talking like 20 plus editions, which is another interesting topic in terms of comic books and things of that nature, of volumes. Something you might notice when you're looking at a graphic novel, or specifically when you're looking at a manga or a comic book or a manhwa specifically, is that typically they're short form, they're a lot smaller, and a lot of times they get compiled into what are called volumes, and this is for the sake of both the publisher and you as a reader. Instead of having to put 40 tiny books on hold, you can instead put one large book on hold.
And I think, you know what, I should mention this because this is also very important, especially with how media is being translated nowadays. Of course, this was very big in the early 90s. I think it wasn't in the 80s, it was more in the 90s, early 2000s, like Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and all of those. They were adapted from novel to TV. And I think the funniest thing is Of course, when it's something like fanciful like that, it's going to be adapted into like an animation.
Yes.
But manhwas, and this is, I don't know why it's so interesting to me, they're always adapted into K-dramas.
This is, once again, my personal opinion, not necessarily based on fact, but if I had to guess, it would be the theming. You know, in terms of, say, Pokemon as an example, the Pokemon cards were already drawn, and they want to maintain that art style, that fanciful, whimsical fun. So bringing it into an animated animation style like anime or what have you is more fitting, whereas a manhwa typically has more contemporary adult themes. So then translating it into a realistic, real-life adaptation makes a lot more sense. Whereas if we're adapting an anime into a real life, which they've done a couple of times, and up until the One Piece adaptation, which is very recent, most of them have been, I'm sorry, garbage. Death Note.
That one is a stain in our media.
You know, the Death Note anime, fantastic. The Death Note live action, it's worth a watch.
It's interesting.
Once. Yeah. Nonetheless, we'll put it that way.
Yeah. I was forced to watch.
Yes. I was forced to watch for a college class as an example of what not to do.
Yeah. No, yeah.
But that being said, moving on to Lore Olympus. Lore Olympus started out as a webtoon. And then got translated, because of its popularity, both online and due to the quality of the story, a publisher came, it was, I believe, Penguin Publishing House, and said, hey, we would like to adapt this into volumes of novels. Some of the art style changed when that happened. She made the work look less crunchy, in her words. The coloring changed, it looks a little bit more glossy now. And the storyline changed just a hair. They took out some chapters, they moved some things around for sake of publishing standards in terms of storylines, which we'll talk about a little bit. What happens in volume 1, I actually disagree with.
I didn't know. I will say that when I was reading the novel, I read it on webtoon originally because it's just convenient for me, and you had the physical copy, and I was like, I'll give you the time to read it, I won't rush you. And I was at the time traveling, and I said, you know, let's read it on my phone. And I already had access to it. I will say on webtoon it does cost money after like a certain amount of time. You can do like ads and watch it like that. However, it is it's a little bit harder. When you have to like rely on ads and you're like, no, I need to go to the next episode.
I need to know what the next episode is.
And they do give you 6 coins, which is their like monetary value for getting the next episode. But nonetheless, let's get into the
actual story. So Lore Olympus itself by Rachel Smythe, as I mentioned before, a New Zealand-based artist. It is very loosely based on Greek mythology. AKA, we're getting a lot of the Greek gods, we're getting some of their myths, and we're getting the exemplary characteristics of said gods. Sometimes she'll take some of the more negative characteristics of the deities and kind of exemplify them. I would say Aphrodite and Apollo get treated especially dirty in her series. They turn into real villains. And in other cases, she takes some of the more positive qualities, in which obviously the main 2 characters of the story are Hades and Persephone. They kind of get their positive qualities more highlighted than their negative qualities. She then kind of turns it into a love story, once again loosely based on Greek mythology, between Hades and Persephone, and it is a slow burn throughout the volumes of the story. Today we're focusing mostly on volume 1, which is where we get introduced to the characters. We get introduced to the big 3, which are Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon. We get introduced to some of the other main female casts, such as Hera and Aphrodite and Persephone and Artemis. And we also get introduced to a couple of different settings in the world, which is the real life. We get introduced to Persephone's garden, which is kind of in her mind to a degree. And we also get Olympus, which is where they have their parties and things of that nature. Something I find particularly wonderful about graphic novels in general, but I specifically love about Lore Olympus, is its use of color theory. When you're talking about the difference between just reading a book versus reading a graphic novel, a book is great, and don't get me wrong, I'm a librarian, we read all the time. We've read several books for this podcast. But there's something so wonderful when you get to incorporate some of the visual elements. And what Rachel Smythe does in Lore Olympus is she uses color theory specifically to really help exemplify the characteristics of the characters. Persephone is pink, particularly at the beginning of the series. She gets a little bit more of like a darker maroon as the series progresses and she becomes the queen of the underworld. But she starts out as pink, this light, bright spring color, whereas Hades is this dark blue. He's somber and he's respectful and he's stoic. And we see that in some of the other characters as well. What do you think of the color in Lore Olympus?
I think it's so beautiful, color theory. Just like, I think when you think of color theory, it really, I think the one character that really shows it beautifully is Hades. But because everything around him, everything in the underworld is blue, like him. And I think it's just a really great example of what color theory is supposed to be with just the shadings and the use of blue and hue, you know?
Something I find so interesting about Hades in Lore Olympus, both the character and the place, is typically when we're talking about a hellscape, which Hades is, you think of this red, fiery, torturous, what have you, but in Greek mythology, that's not what Hades is meant to be. It's meant to be just a place that the dead reside. And that's kind of the vibe it ends up giving with the themes of blue and black and gray, which is mostly what's used to depict this in the show, or in the show, in the volumes, the graphic novels. There we go. And that's something that Persephone even comments on when she ends up waking up in Hades after a drunken night of Greek partying. We should emphasize at this point, Lore Olympus is an adult graphic novel. There are adult themes. It is based off of Greek mythology, which is also a little violent. Elements of different varieties that are not necessarily suitable for kids. We'll put it that way.
No, Greek mythology is wild. And I love it. I love Greek mythology. We love Percy Jackson.
Yeah, we love Percy Jackson. We love Rick.
We are Percy Jackson
far more
household.
Adaptable for kids.
Yes. Kids, you want to hear Greek mythology? Percy Jackson.
Percy Jackson. That's going to be a fictional story for children if you want to go that route. But Lore Olympus, definitely for adults.
100%, yeah.
But that being said, after that party, Persephone wakes up in Hades and goes, wow, it's a lot prettier down here than I anticipated.
Yeah. I think the way that they use the blue is such a somber way of kind of like, and maybe because death to me isn't as somber as many people bring it out to be, but I think that in her adaptation it's meant to be like this loneliness, this kind of like drag, this kind of...
Hades is very much a lonely character. As much as he's constantly being forced to go to parties and social events and things like that, at the very beginning of the book, we find out that he's in this relationship with a she described as a nymph. Her name is Minth, but I can't remember what kind of Greek entity she is.
She's a nymph, right?
She's a nymph. She might be. She's something similar to that. But she doesn't treat him very well. So while he has a relationship, it's not great. His brothers don't really listen to him. He doesn't have a great connection to some of the female deities. So he spends most of his time with his many dogs. He has more than just Cerberus.
Right, yeah.
One of his points is he goes and he rescues dogs, and that's one of his positive character traits. But it's him and his dogs in hell.
He's just like, I'm just here, sad, lonely guy.
Absolutely.
I think I'm going to mention the last episode where we talked about the whole like, I guess the trope of like...
The romance trope, yes.
Yeah, of like, funny, happy girl who's a little quirky sometimes, falls for the stoic, very, very serious man.
You know, very much Lore Olympus is a tropey romance story, through and through.
I think, and it's that is such a manhwa like thing. That's one of the like biggest tropes that it's always used, and I fall for it. I do. I don't know what you think about that.
I need to read more manhwas.
Yeah.
If it wasn't obvious from the discussion we've already had, I've read far more comic books and mangas and things of that nature. Like, I grew up reading Pokemon. I grew up reading Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
Like, that was more my MO.
Yeah.
And it's only been in recent history that I've kind of come into manhwas and some of the more Korean and Chinese stories. I was very much located in Japan in terms of my, like, comic reading growing up.
I feel like, I did grow up with a lot of Pokemon. I didn't grow up with too many of the classic Dragon Ball Z. There were so many of my cousins who were really down for it, and I was like, okay. But my sister was more of a Pokemon kid than anything else, and so that's where I kind of got it. But I didn't fall into her steps as hard as she did. Yeah. But going back to Lore Olympus. Yeah, sorry, I got us off topic.
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's okay that we're kind of jumping around a little bit because we're loosely talking about graphic novels in general. But coming back to Lore Olympus, something else that I really like is, depending on the location we're in, the art style changes just a little bit. Like when we're in Persephone's brain, and maybe this is just my own personal interpretation of it, so take that what you will. But you kind of get this more like watercolor style where the edges are a little fuzzy, and you can
bleed in.
They bleed in. You can really tell that you're in more of this like foggy mental space.
Yes.
Whereas when we're in a physical location, you get these sharp, crisp lines, with the exception of the underworld where it gets a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Like almost as if it's a little rainy, and once again, that kind of somber feeling.
Yeah. I think Persephone's like mind is meant. I think that is kind of intentional, but just when you go into her mind and you kind of see what her thoughts are, and especially when you look into the past, like her past, when they use that kind of style with her past too, right? Yeah.
And it's not just with Persephone; they also do it at the very end of Volume 1. We get a nightmare sequence that Hades is having, and it has that same kind of airy edge to the texture. But once again, Lore Olympus is a loose adaptation of Greek mythology. It's a testament of her love towards Greek mythology, but she very much takes liberties and takes this myth of Hades and Persephone and turns it into a cheesy modern romantic trope.
Yes.
And we chose Lore Olympus because it's a very popular graphic novel at the moment. But there are several stories that do a far better job of an accurate adaptation to their original stories.
Yeah.
And speaking of manga, even though this is less manga and more American, I have to take this moment to shout out Manga Classics, which is a company that takes classic stories like Jane Eyre, Alice in Wonderland, Frankenstein, Shakespeare, and translates them into manga format to have the elements of art be able to help increase storytelling there, and also make it a little bit more accessible for kids. To me, some of those are a far more accurate adaptation of those stories, even though with Shakespeare you do lose a bit of that iambic pentameter, which is definitely losing a core part of Shakespeare. But in terms of storyline, you get a lot more quality there. What are some other graphic novels that you would like to share?
So I actually looked this up before we started it because I wanted to make sure, like, if people really do love Lore Olympus, we can actually look into Punderworld, which is a little bit more. It's not as true to Greek mythology, but it is a little bit more closer to Greek mythology than Lore Olympus is. But I think if you guys want to catch up with me and what I'm reading, it's called The Broken Ring. This Marriage Will Fail. It's amazing. I love it so much. I'm plugging it in because it's an amazing one. I've been obsessed with it since it came out. It's a very tragic love story. Of course, I had to make it a love story, and it's about this woman who is of a high rank in Spain. So this takes place in Spain, and it's really good because I didn't really grow up with all the history of Spain, very, very little history of Mexico, where my parents are from, and so just knowing that kind of like context and like period piece is it is a period piece.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, and it does kind of it's not true to history, but it does play a little bit with the history that was happening at that time, which is really good. That's also one of my favorite things is like you said, the classics are turned into that, but also these what are they called? So, like actual true events can be put into comics, and I think that's one thing that we as librarians will always say is graphic novels are books. It is reading. It is
absolutely reading.
And I think that's why it's so important to actually, fight for that right. And you've talked about this a lot extensively about.
I'm sitting here buzzing.
You're just like, I need to talk about this. No, it's so important, and I think telling kids that comics aren't books is such a loss for everybody, not just for our schools, not just for our kids' literacy and understanding. It's a loss for our society, because I'm like, it's reading, it's telling a story, it's creating images, it's creating images, but also showing them the images if they can't create them in their mind. And I think that's beautiful.
As you mentioned, I have genuinely gone to conferences and spoken on why graphic novels and a couple other things like video games and TTRPGs are actually beneficial tools in promoting literacy. Don't get me wrong, I would love if every single person went into the library, picked up a book, just a chapter book, and was able to read through the book. But for a variety of reasons in today's society, sometimes we do not have the mental space to be able to sit down and just read a book. There are so many benefits to graphic novels. As I've already touched on, you get to use elements of art theory and art history in telling your story, which can be wonderful. It gives you, particularly when you're a younger reader and you're learning to get context, you can get a visual imagery to help build your vocabulary. It also, because graphic novels for so long were kind of pushed aside as this secondary literature, it allowed for a lot more marginalized voices to come up and speak through and gain popularity. As we talked about with Lore Olympus, this started out on an online platform. This wasn't through a traditional publisher originally. This was just something that she was posting online. And we've seen that also in comic books and in manhwas and in several other things. You mentioned as well that graphic novels have had the capacity to tell real life stories. Two things that immediately come to mind are March by John Lewis, which is about the civil rights movement, as well as They Called Us Enemy by George Takei, which is about his time in Japanese internment camps in World War II. Graphic novels really have this way of both visually and realistically depicting some real life events in a way that a book might read as a little bit too dry and boring. It adds this level of empathy due to art that I think really brings out history in a wonderful and beautiful way.
100%. I think one of the things that people tend to say is reading levels are so low nowadays.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's not reading. You can read, but how well are you able to comprehend?
Yes.
And I think that's the beauty of graphic novels.
Yes.
Is teaching reading comprehension for kids. And more than ever nowadays, more than ever in the world and in times of today, reading comprehension is important.
Yes.
Because just looking at something and being like, oh, that's what it is. There's so much more. I feel like before the internet and everything was like that, it was like, don't judge a book by its cover. Nowadays it's, don't judge an article by its title. And I'm like, yeah, because it's reading comprehension. You need to go throughout the whole thing. You really need to read everything to understand. And I don't think you can have that skill without having proper reading comprehension skills at a young age. And that's why graphic novels are just very important.
Yeah, they're important.
Passionate about this.
Indeed. If you can't tell, we're both big fans of graphic novels here.
Yeah.
The thing about the graphic novel on that point is it really does encourage that multiple layers of analysis when you're actually reading something, because not only are you reading the text, you're reading the way that the text is written. Is there any special effects on the fonts that might indicate something more? Like, is it jagged, saying that this is scary? Is it small, indicating a whisper? Are we getting visual cues as well? And in those visual cues, what does that mean about what's being said? Can we take what's being said at face value, or does the expression of what's being said on the face indicate something more? And it forces you to think on all of these different points on what's actually being said on the page. Which translates into, when you're reading an actual novel, this kind of understanding of the depth of the layers of a story.
100%. Yeah. Also, something that you were talking about the webtoons.
Yes.
There's something really interesting about Lore Olympus. Because this was one of the, I think don't exactly quote me on this, but it would have been some of the earlier series that were called webtoon originals.
Yes.
Because Lore Olympus had been written as let me give some backstory on this before I say anything else. But Webtoon has on their app a way for you to publish. You do not have to be an official like artist or author or anything like that. You can publish anything that you write onto Webtoon. And this is mostly with a lot of Webtoon websites and apps. You can do that with a lot of them, but I think Webtoon is the best place to start for most people. And the beauty of Lore Olympus is it started off as a canvas. I'm confusing it with Canva.
The design program, yes.
Yeah, but Canvas. It started off as a canvas, and Webtoon saw its potential and gave monetary support to Rachel to create a Webtoon original.
Yes.
So then it would have that support. And a lot of famous comics right now that are coming out, like the Kiss Bet, which is a teen one. There was another one. Sub-Zero is one that was really small, and then it became really big all of a sudden. Like, I'm not joking you. I think their canvas came out to 20 chapters, which is a lot considering they're once every week. So 20 weeks total of these chapters dropping, and then after that was it adapted into a webtoon.
Yes.
And it's really. I think these platforms are really important for people to also kind of publish their work, publish their art.
Yes.
And it's Lore Olympus is one of the earlier ones.
Absolutely.
That was adapted, and that's why it's become this like graphic novel that you can check out in books or in libraries and then buy them in stores because it was supported by Webtoon originally.
Absolutely. And when you're looking at graphic novels, a lot of the ones that started on Webtoons now have the little like sticker on it that says this was original. Oh, Webtoon's original.
Yeah.
Like this started out on this platform and has now gotten adapted into a book.
Yeah. And I think that's wonderful. And actually, this is something I read today.
Yes.
Lore Olympus is being turned into a series, an animation series.
Oh,
not
really?
live action. I know. I was worried it would be a live action.
Oh, if it was live action, my reaction would have been very different.
Yes. No, it's going to be an animation, which is a lot better than doing it into a live action.
Yes.
So it's going to be very interesting to see, just because I have seen people talk about the art style a lot online, where they talk about the early chapters are great, but because, and I think this also talks about how fast people want this stuff.
Yes.
And it's kind of a little counterproductive to what Webtoon is trying to do, because once they become Webtoon originals, it gets really hard to like keep up with like end dates and publishing dates on the website, and so a lot of people after a certain point in the series were very disappointed with the art style because, and I did notice this when I was scrolling through the little chapters. Irises were a very big point in the comics.
Very much. It's one of the biggest changes between the original Webtoons to the book.
Yeah.
Is she changes the eyes to be a lot bigger and almost more cartoony.
Well, actually, that's in the early chapters. But in the later chapters, they changed to just being black dots.
Are they just black dots later on? Oh goodness, I haven't read some of the like later stuff.
Yeah, that was. I mean, I did my own little deep dive of like other people's discussions. I was like, let's see what other people are saying. And a lot of people were very mad that the irises are gone. It's really funny to me that one of the things that people get mad about is irises. And I'm like, but it really just speaks to volumes like of art style and how important it is for, story concept and people's images of these things.
Absolutely.
I feel like some people find it easier to imagine things and create the world themselves, while other people find it really hard.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to have that kind of graphic novel stuff.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
On that point, I totally agree with you of the fact of that argument in and of itself shows the importance of the visual aspect of a storytelling.
Yes.
But in conclusion, all of this to say, Lore Olympus is an interesting story. It's a good, if you like a good cheesy romance, it's worth checking out. It got adapted into volumes for a reason. I think there are 11 volumes now.
11 volumes.
There are 11 volumes now.
Volume 10 is about to drop, and then volume 11 is the final, because Lore Olympus ended, I think it was July of last year.
I know it was really recently.
Yes, it was very recently. I'm going to reveal how old I am here. Please do not judge. I'm 26. This was released when I had graduated high school, so it's been 8 years of this wonderful comic.
Yes.
I started it when I was in when I was in high school, and then it's wild to think that I'm this old now.
You are not that old. But all that being said, whether you're reading Lore Olympus or you're reading a true-to-life a story from something that happened in history, or you're reading a comic book by Stan Lee about Spider-Man, or you're reading a Shonen Jump, or you're reading a manhwa, there is value to graphic novels. They are valid literature that have a place in libraries, and it's worth checking out if you've never seen one before.
No, yeah. I mean, I love them. Yeah.
And now we're going to be transitioning into a special interview with our events manager, Alex Garcia.
Well, okay. Hello, Alex.
Hey, Brandon.
Good to see you, sir. Well, for our patrons that are not acquainted with you, although most people are these days, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your title and what you do for GCPLD.
Sure. Well, the people that are acquainted with me are our partners. Usually our patrons are not. So my name is Alex Garcia. I have been working in libraries for almost 20 years now. Started when I was 19. Most of that time was in Southern Arizona, where I've done a little bit of everything. You know, started as a part-timer, kind of, start as a dishwasher, end up as a chef, kind of a thing. I did just general front desk work, and then I moved up to do teen programs for about 4 or 5 years, and then being the coordinator for Spanish outreach and services for that library system. I moved here to Garfield County in January of 2021, so it's been just about 5 years to take on the events manager position here, and what that is just kind of overseeing our regular programs and our special events throughout the year.
Dang, wow. 19, that seems really young to get into the library field. How did that?
Well, that was accidental. So through high school, college, I used to do drywall and some roofing. My stepdad was a contractor, so obviously he would drag me along with him. So all weekends, all summers, winters, any break time, I was working there, and it is Southern Arizona. So by the time I was 19, I was in college. I was kind of desperate to work inside. You know, I kind of got tired of 100 degrees plus outdoors kind of work, although I did enjoy it. But somebody said, hey, there's a part-time position open at the library. I was still a full-time student, and that's all I was looking for. And I had no idea, like almost anybody, what a library really does or what it's like. You know, I had my limited experience as a teen in the library. I had never volunteered or anything, kind of just went in, did an application. I had no experience other than some construction work, and I think by luck I got it. And I didn't know I liked libraries until a few months in. I think I was a part-timer at 19 for just about 6 months when a full-time opened. Okay. And even though I was still a full-time student and they offered me the full-time, I'm like, let's do it. Yeah. And just stuck around.
What did you start doing? Was it like page work or what?
The kind of page work, the most memorable task I had, you know, I was working front desk, things like that. The two most memorable things I have about early library work for me, you know, that first year was one, getting a library card application crumpled and thrown at me by an irate patron who didn't want to pay $15 for an out-of-county resident library fee. So I'm like, okay, this is the kind of stuff it's going to be. Yeah. Then the other thing, I remember shelving CDs. I would spend about 4 hours of my part-time day just shelving CDs. I guess they would just give the most kind of time-intensive kind of duties to that. And it was just old CDs in this old wooden cabinet that you draw things back, and it'd be like this kind of stackable thing, and you'd kind of alphabetizing CDs every day. Yeah. So a lot of shelving, a lot of helping people on desk, but that menial background work is mostly what I did. It wasn't until I did teen services that I got into more specialized library work, but I remember those front desk service years really fondly. I never knew authors and new books as much and as well as I did when I was actually shelving the books. I loved spending hours in those shelves just putting stuff away, but I memorized every new book that was coming out. I think people always ask librarians or people at a desk for book recommendations. You should find the people that are actually shelving the books, whether they're pages or volunteers, but they're having, daily contact with, I know this author by heart now, because you get bored and you start reading synopsis and the flaps when you're kind of, 18-year-old slacking off shelving, and but you get to know those authors really well in those books, and every time there's a new addition to the series, even if you have nothing to do with the collection or ordering it or keeping track of what's coming out, you're seeing it. And then just my experience is you kind of gaze at the bios, the synopsis so much that you end up knowing a lot about what's in those stacks.
Yeah. Was this what year would have this been?
Oh God, I mean, this is roughly 20 years ago.
Yeah. So is this pre-Sierra? Is this
I never experienced Sierra until I got to this library system.
Okay,
So different library systems have different programs.
Yeah.
The one I remember using was Cersei Dynix workflows, and if you're in library world, you know them, but they're all the same thing. Right. At that point, the only contact I had with something like Sierra was just checking out books, placing holds, turning in books, just a regular library kind of front desk thing.
And for anyone who doesn't know, Sierra is just the system that we use, the operating system that
boring jargon stuff.
Manages all the ins and outs of the book world.
Just call it our catalog. It's the easiest thing to refer to it as.
Yep. Yeah. Could do it with a aesthetic update, in my opinion. So your first full-time position, what was its official title? Was that the teen?
No. So it was the same position. I pretty much, when I got hired, there was two positions open, a full-time and a part-time version of it. And I got the part-time version of it, and within weeks, within months, the full-time opened, and it was just the same thing. And it's just a general, library general assistant, do a little bit of everything, which is the best introduction. If you're interested or looking for work, it's very difficult to tell you what a library job is like. You gotta kind of see it first. There's a lot of creative freedom. There's a lot of little things that you would never expect, but you get into that front desk, whenever you see a library associate, generalist, page, you start finding out what it is. And it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years in that I got a specialized job.
What district was this, if you don't mind my asking?
The county is Yuma County in southern Arizona. It's that corner between, that Mexico, California, Arizona corner there.
Well, so you work in this full-time position, you're learning the ins and outs of the library world. How long were you in that position for?
About 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Enough to learn all the basics. Customer service was the main part of it, so that's how you get to know our patrons. Nobody knows our patrons as much as the front desk, frontline people.
Right. Well, I know you have a degree in history, right?
I do. Yeah.
So was this the time that you were in uni, or was that later?
Yes, it was. I think I was working full time and going to school full time. I had gone to school in person for a while, and then when I got my job full time, I switched to online for about another 3 or 4 years before I graduated with my bachelor's in history. So I was doing both. By the time I graduated, I was doing that teen programming and teen services job.
Okay, all right. And then what was that like, getting that new position?
Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
Like anybody else, whenever the reason for getting a new job, I was very happy in front desk. That's actually what I love to do the most, and I haven't done that in 5 years, maybe 7 years plus. But that front line thing, that relationship with the patrons is amazing. So when the position in teen services became available, like everybody else at that time, I was still in my early 20s going, well, that's a step up. It's a little bit of a salary increase. The hours are the same. a little bit worse actually when you're in programming, you're doing some events, there's a lot of weekends and evenings.
Yeah.
So the schedule gets a little worse, but your pay gets a little bit better. And then again, I had no experience with anything, you know, other than I've been working at the library now, and they took a chance on me. And simultaneously, I became that position was a double thing. It was teen services and Spanish outreach coordinator.
Okay.
Eventually, I let, you know, it became 2 full-time jobs, so they did me the kindness of taking me from teen services to Spanish, but that's later. So I was doing my in-library work was coordinating teen programs and just being in a teen desk and having a relationship with the teens while I was doing outreach for Spanish services. Eventually, I was fully Spanish services, but once I got that position with teen services, which I had no idea about, you know, I thought about it for a few days. It's like, should I really get, you know, I considered it a promotion because it was from frontline to another department that dealt less with the patrons or dealt with only a specific, you know, I was no longer doing library cards, no longer checking in books, no longer shelving. The job was staffing that teen area. I was very lucky that the library I worked in had a separate room just for teens.
Yeah.
That needed to be staffed the whole time, and then coming up with programs for them, activities for them, and going out to schools, high schools, doing, you know, fairs and things like that as library outreach. Yeah. So it was the beginning of me doing something other than that general library work, and I fell in love with it. I mean, I worked in that teen area for about 5 years, so I saw my 13-year-olds turn 18, you know, so I got a whole generation of them, and it was fantastic. You know, yeah.
Did you have any control over programming, or?
I did. So the task was to just, you know, generate programmings for the teens, which ran the gamut. You know, we didn't really have a budget, so it was. I missed the times of having to do programs with zero money because you get really creative.
Okay. Yeah.
Teens are very, very difficult to make programs for, especially scheduled calendar programs. If you tell them, well, we're going to have this chess club here, because I think that's the first thing I did, because I, you know, back in high school I was in the chess club. Yep. I won a couple of tournaments. So I'm like, all right, so I know chess. I know some teens do chess. And that was my first thing. I'm going to do this chess club for them, and I try to make it special. You know, I made it. You know, I made a flyer. It was action kind of looking. It was just once a week you sit down and play chess. But I also would generate weekly chess puzzles. You know, things you print out. Yeah. And it, you know, you got certain pieces and like, you know, end the game in 3 moves or end the game in 5 moves. So part of it was, you know, kids would complete puzzles, but also we'd make tournaments, things like that. Yeah. So, you know, that caught the attention of like 3 teens that were into chess, and that was my beginning. And then I got into, you know, card games. The kids taught me how to play Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and Magic the Gathering, and then Smash Brothers. So I had no idea of, you know, video games very much and card games very much, but what I did, instead of me forcing programs onto the teens, I kind of just found out what they were into already and turned that into a program in the most organic way possible. So instead of saying, well, every Thursday at 2 o'clock we'll play, you know, be here for that. Like, you can't do that with teens. Right. So it was whenever I had a group, 5 or more, I'd stand up from the desk and say, hey, we're doing a tournament right now. And eventually they would come up with the programs for me. So the kids would say, hey, can we do a tournament? It's like, yeah, let me know when. It's like, can we do it this Saturday? I said, sure. You know, I'm here, I'll be here. And I'd go out and get prices. We used to rely on volunteers for everything, donations. And those are my fondest memories. We'd have these tournaments. We'd have video game tournaments. I would also DIY my Halloween decorations at the teen desk. So yes, it was getting away with doing stuff for my home, but I would do it in the desk. For example, I'd make a full-size ghost or a mummy with, you know, saran wrap and all that stuff. So I would use the teens as models. So we'd have a ton of fun, you know, grabbing one kid, and then the other kids would wrap them in saran, you know, all the safety things, do some paper mache on them, and then have it dry, cut them out, and we have these full-size things. So then I'd go home and decorate with full-size kind of mannequins. and I would turn those into programs. So like whenever I was doing a project, I remember another one was for like a comic festival or a fantasy festival. I built a small version of that Harry Potter hedge maze, but full size. So what I did is I grabbed every single box for months and months that our books would come in. And every single box was painted green with leaves, detailed leaves, until I had dozens and dozens, and then we duct taped them together and just turned one into a maze from floor to the top. But it was the teens that made it, and they had a lot of fun. We played with paint for months, and every couple of days was, hey, we're building the hedge maze today. And if I had 15 kids working on the hedge maze, I'd say, I'd go to my statistics at the end of the day, go, hedge maze building program, 15 kids today, and then that showed that service. So it was a lot more of non-scheduled program. But when we had teens, card games, video game tournaments, or we were doing some hands-on projects, I saw those kids become friends. I was very lucky that I was kind of smack down between 4 high schools. So it'd be kids from different schools. They'd hang out at the library waiting for their parents, and they made these very strong social bonds with projects that I would have for them. So I mean, it was a great fun. There was 3 of us working the teen desk. The original team was 3 men. It was me, our supervisor, and then a male part-timer. So it really turned into a boys' club. And then, a couple years later, staff moves around. I was still there, but then our main coordinator was a lady, and our part-timer was also a girl. So they had more connection with the teen girls, and then I inherited all the teen boys. So all of our programs were kind of that boys' club kind of thing. We had a ton of fun. I do remember I asked for the switch to Spanish services when I think I hit 30, and I kind of went, I can't hang around with teens all day anymore. I felt
too old.
I felt too old. Quite honestly, it was great fun, but I kind of saw myself going, as fun as this is, I can see myself stuck, for the next 20 years playing with teens. And I realized, I'm being a good mentor to them, but I need to become more of an adult mentor to them, and not engage with all these program things. That was just my own feeling. So then I switched from working with teens with our Spanish community, and that felt a lot more adult. And that to me was like a real marker between, turning 30. That's kind of when I switched from really working with teens to kind of that adult Spanish-speaking kind of community.
Well, like on that note, and before we move on to your work in the Spanish, for the Spanish-speaking community, it's common knowledge today among our many coordinators that teens are some of the hardest groups to get even just into the library these days. Have you noticed those differences just kind of working among the branches? And
with our libraries here?
Yeah, and on that note, is there anything that you think we could be doing differently or better that pulling from that expertise?
So teens are, like you said, notoriously difficult. I think the only demographic that's more difficult for libraries to bring in are adult men, single men. We just don't have like a wealth of programs that they're interested in. Right. Teens have busy lives. Outside of libraries, outside of school, they're busy experiencing the world. They're getting their first part-time jobs. They're out in the town, they're skating, they're messing around with friends, the things that you're supposed to do. In many ways, the inside of a library is not the priority for a teen. It's a very safe environment. It's a very sterile, controlled environment. And my own opinion is teens need that risk, so they're not going to be, when I hung out in a library as a teen, I got kicked out of libraries all the time because I'd be doing risky behaviors. I'd be slamming chairs on the ground knowing that it would get me in trouble because I was being disruptive, a 15-year-old boy. They don't want to be stuck inside. Like I said, when I experienced teens, it was just the luck that we were kind of in between 4 high schools, a couple of, one remedial, 2 regular high schools, and 1 private Catholic high school that was right next door. So just by virtue of them all needing to wait for their parents, and even then it was difficult. That's why I had to get creative and pop up a program when they were there. Not with teens, it's not if you build it, they will come. They will not come. They have to help you build it. They need that ownership. It needs to feel like their own thing because they're working for that autonomy. So then whenever you say, teens come to my program, they're like, I don't want your thing, no matter what the thing is. My experience was that if you take their thing and you help them with it, and it feels like you're just making their thing a little bit better.
Right.
So it's creativity. You need flexibility, you need creativity. And that was before COVID. It was difficult before COVID. And then COVID happened, and of course we went through about 3 to 5 years of no hanging out in the library. That's 3 to 4 years in a teenager's life. You lost a generation of teenagers. I'm sure we lost a generation of everything across the board, everywhere.
Yeah.
So what we're facing now is, I think the strategy was really, tweens and younger kids are great for libraries. They do want to hang out in more safe spaces. They're more dependent on adults, and they need supervision. So by that, we have our tweens. So now the strategy is to rebuild those tweens into library regular teens when they get here. We've had some success, but it takes a staff member that has real interests of those same things that teens are into. It takes that kind of juvenile energy, which is why when I turned 30, I kind of said, I don't know if I can keep this up longer.
Right.
I don't know if I can be 35 playing card games 4 days a week for my job. I feel like not only am I going to get tired of it, they're also going to get tired of this old guy. It takes a special person, and we do have some in our libraries. I can name drop a few, but I won't for their own kind of privacy. But you can find them in every library. People who are really into this, teen themes,
right.
And they're willing to get out there outside of the library and just engage. They need to feel like you're a mentor, but also a friend, and you kind of need to get good at balancing that line. I'm a fun person, but also I'm an adult, so you're going to respect me, and that's kind of difficult.
Yeah.
Teens get lost in that. Are you my friend or are you my supervisor, mentor?
Yeah.
And they'll tug on those lines, and you kind of need to get strong.
Yeah.
And then it's so difficult to keep up with the things they like. I think I also got lucky that when I entered that teen space, Magic the Gathering was having a huge resurgence, which is like from the 70s and 80s.
It's classic, man.
Dungeons and Dragons was coming back as well, so
Yeah.
it kind of gave me a thing. So if teens would not have been into that, no idea. I couldn't go back right now and just pick up where I left off. I have no idea what a 14-year-old likes now. And that's the difficult part. You age as a library employee, and the teens don't.
Yeah.
And they get it. Every 4 years, it's a new class. They're into new things, and you kind of need to stay on top of that. And you need to give them your attention. You cannot be. You cannot do a program for teens and then go and watch a desk and then expect the teens to run it. You need to be in there with them, giving them your time. You're one of them, kind of just hyping it all up. They need that extra attention.
Right. And it just gets me thinking, like, these programs that we typically cater towards those demographics, those difficult demographics, all demographics really, they tend to be niche hobby passions anyways. Something like board games and MTG and cosplay, the comic fest that we're going to have.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not like, though we do taxonomize our coordinators in such a way as to cater towards specific age groups, teens and tweens, and so on. The difficulty, I think, is that even within those age groups, it's not as if we are even. It's not as if it's even possible to reach the swath of teens generally.
Not at all. That's why I mentioned my other coworkers. When it was 3 men, it looked a certain way. When it was 3 men running all of the teen programs, well, it was a boys' club. We did boy things because we didn't know how to engage with girls, so they kind of get left out. Not entirely, but in a major part. And then when staff switch and we have a combination of female and male employees, you can catch that balance, and that's just a gender balance. There's other things. Your 13 to 14-year-olds are going to be into a thing that's completely different than your 17-year-olds.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's why you need one person can't do it all, even at a single location. I would be good at the card games and the crafting. but somebody would be better at the college prep and
Right.
like that, preparing you to be an adult. So they would lead that, and only some teens would be interested in that. We had a big number of teens that were in ROTC, the military cadet programs and
Yeah,
things
yeah.
like that. So they're into something different. We'd have to do mechanics workshops for them and get good at that. Some of them are good at tech.
Yeah.
And as one person, you really need to go out of your way to be a little bit good at everything, or really, really specify and just rely on that one demographic, just whichever way you want to go.
Well, so I suppose, in your shift from teens to the Spanish, the Spanish field, why was this purely because it was a time for change for you? Was it a point of passion for you?
Well, twice, with that. It's that I felt some sort of clock, I turned 30. Every decade, every zero age is like, I gotta make a change, or I gotta step up to the next thing. And I realized, like right before going into that specialized teen programming job, I was like, I'm just a page. It kind of feels like just a regular, volunteer kind of part-time kind of work. At some point I'm going to get something, I need my salary needs to increase, the purpose of my work needs to increase as well. So teens did that for me in my 20s.
Right.
And when I turned 30, I'm like, I have to do more adult things. Whatever that means for you. For me, it meant, well, I can't play board games for a living anymore. I can't play video games for a living. Now, not knocking it if there's plenty of industries that do that, but for me, I felt like I have to get into more adult kind of work. That was one, but it coincided with just, I was wearing two hats for a while, and I've always kind of done that, but I was doing teen outreach and services, and I was coordinating the outreach for Spanish speakers. And, in the beginning, it's fine because you're building it, but once you've built it, it kind of grows on its own.
Yeah.
So
You can't juggle both.
Can't juggle both. I need to really focus on one, and it felt like time, to do more adult things. And in my Spanish program experience, which I did another 5 years of that or so, and that was the last thing I did before I moved here. That's when I started really coordinating for a district. That library I worked with was an 8-library system. And for teen programs, I was just running the teen programs in one location. For the Spanish programs, I was overseeing it for the 8 locations with staff help at each branch. So that kind of got my experience in coordinating bigger, wider things. And then it got me going into adult education, which I kind of fell in love with. That's what I made the bulk of my service for Spanish speakers, is getting them into, continuing education activities, ESL programs, computer classes. We had a very robust GED program, and it was mostly serving immigrants because we were right at that Mexico-Arizona border, so we had a wealth of just brand new first-generation immigrants, which that was easy to kind of figure out. The main 3 things that they wanted was technology help. They wanted to know how to use computers. This was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not that much. 5 to 10 years ago. A lot of them were not high school graduated, so they were working on their GEDs, and then of course learning English. So that's kind of that was the three baseline of
Provisions.
Of getting those Spanish speaking patrons, and then introducing them to libraries. So when you talk about difficult demographics for libraries, you have teens and you have Spanish speakers. Our library in the last 5 years has made huge strides, huge progress in reaching out to our Spanish speaking community. But that's also a very well-known point of struggle for libraries. It's very difficult to get Spanish speaking patrons as regular library users for different things, because they're immigrants. They have a tendency to be on the lower economic scale, just because they haven't been here for generations. They're the first ones getting things started.
Right.
They're multiple kid families, different things.
Which is sad, because I think, not to say libraries are the be-all, end-all solution to, getting out of poverty or anything like that. It's far too big of a sweeping claim, but, I can see why historically that community has, for one reason or another, and I suppose I'll just ask you this, like, seen libraries as not serving them, but losing out on the access to resources that libraries provide that might help, alleviate that
it's a
position.
cultural thing. I think I don't want to stress too much on the economic level of it. It's definitely an aspect, and I wouldn't say poverty per se. It's more of a culture, and I wager that it's similar to a lot of different immigrant groups, not just Hispanic immigrants. And my experience in Arizona was mostly Mexican immigrants.
Okay.
Here we get a kind of a patchwork of a lot of Spanish-speaking countries.
Yeah.
So literacy levels are lower. Mexico, as an example, does not have a very strong public library culture. There's a lot of academic libraries, so even the word for library, and that's the most telling thing, is our Spanish speakers don't know the word for library in Spanish. It's one of those simple things that we have to educate people on a daily basis. So they say librería because it's the closest thing to the word library. But librería in Spanish is bookstore. Now, Mexico has a bookstore in every corner in a city. They're a very big bookstore culture.
Right.
But if you are not economically sound to just buy books all the time, you just don't read.
Yeah, it's not a niche thing.
It's not a niche. The word for library in Spanish is biblioteca. And we're constantly having to correct people because they'll come in and say, oh, is this the librería?
Yeah.
And we're like, well, yes, but we'll try to kind of gently, it's biblioteca.
Yeah.
That the word is not very well known, that we have to correct it, is telling of the culture. They don't know what a public library is. And we've made, after 5 years, and the 5 years that I've been here is what I have as a reference.
Yeah.
I've seen us do a lot, and when we're educating our community and we're getting there, we get full rooms now of Spanish patrons to our programs.
Yeah.
And our Spanish language collection has grown and it moves now.
Yeah.
But there's, when you're an immigrant, you don't engage in civic activities, just almost by virtue of being an immigrant. You're not connected. You didn't grow up here. You didn't grow up in that library system. You weren't the 10-year-old who came to story times and library programs and kind of grew up with it. A lot of the time, immigrant families are just focused on their economy. They're running a business, which if you're running a business, you don't have time for anything else.
Yeah.
If you're working 2-3 jobs to make sure that your kids get an education and then to make sure that they get a home life, the last thing on your plate is, hey, let's go see what's going on at the rec center or at the library or at your local theater. Like that's so far from their reality, and that's what we're working against. There is a wealth of resources for them. Their lives are better by engaging with these civic organizations, not just the library, but they just need that extra step, and that's the main work with Spanish speakers, and I imagine other immigrants as well. I just don't have a huge experience with others.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying is that, when it comes to integrating into a society, right, as an immigrant, and you feel like these civic institutions are not there to serve you in any way, it makes that integration
it's work.
more difficult.
That's the work aspect of it. When you hear somebody or a library has Spanish services, or you hear somebody's title at a library, like I'm a Spanish outreach, Spanish services, that's what the job is how to introduce these communities, is how to make sure that they know that the library can be a benefit, an everyday benefit to them. The impact of literacy, we don't need to get into that. We know what everyday literacy does for you, and a public library is kind of an epicenter of that. But on top of that, there's so much community engagement. One of my favorite things to talk about with those Spanish speakers in my previous library is when I came in, there was already an ESL group that met every Monday at 10 in the morning, and that's kind of the first program I took over and expanded on. And it was, 8 to 12 homemakers Obviously, they're the ones with the time when kids are at school, husbands are working. So my patrons, my Spanish patrons that I would do programs for initially were older homemakers, grandmas. And because I didn't have a budget, my instructor would be either a retired teacher or somebody studying education. They were teaching ESL as their volunteer time, or I would do it myself.
Okay.
And the main thing was turn it into a social group, make sure that there's coffee, let the ladies know that it's potluck, so they'd bring, they'd bake and bring it in, they'd pitch in for coffee. And before I knew it, the group had grown to like about 20, 25 people.
Yeah.
And they were just practicing conversation. It's not for credits. We're not a college. We're just getting, it's just that continuing education, get practice.
Yeah.
But it turned primarily social with some English learning. And that's the best way I saw it. Instead of really structuring curriculums and you're here to learn and we're going to treat this as school, that worked to get them there.
Yeah.
But once they got comfortable with each other, before I knew it, they asked me, hey, can we do this twice a week? And I said, okay, what other day? Well, let's do Mondays and Thursdays. Okay.
Yeah.
So we started then. And the group would grow. The people that couldn't make it on Mondays made it on Thursdays, vice versa. And then the ones that could make it for both were there. Same thing with computer classes. It was actually the same group that started. And then it turned so social that it was potlucks every session. Eventually, we ended up with 4 sessions a week because they just wanted to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And then after a couple of years, the long-timers were fluent. They didn't notice it. I noticed it when, a couple of years later, you don't need to be in this class anymore.
Yeah.
I'm just going over the basics over and over again and getting into conversation practice. Yeah. And I noticed, I tried to divide them. I'm like, well, maybe we'll do a more advanced level. And it didn't quite work. We weren't equipped for it. We're not a college. I didn't have the time for it. So instead of doing that, those long-timers became teaching assistants, or they would lead the class themselves when they felt confident enough. And then that would be their advanced class. You don't learn, the best way to learn something is to teach it, right? So that's what happened to a couple of ladies who became teachers. Other people would look up to them, slower learners or newer learners that knew them, knew that they've only been fluent in English for about 4 years, but they saw this example of, you were here about 4 years ago and you knew almost nothing or real basic, and now you're fluent. I can be that.
Right.
So that's how I ended up with 4 classes a week, because the students and the teachers themselves were like, I need more practice. Can I just keep doing this?
Right.
And those learners who would become fluent refused to leave the class for the social of it. That was their group.
Yeah.
So that's how I did everything. Computer classes turned social, GED programs turned social, ESL classes turned social, and then from there would come other programs. I kind of went the same way as the teens with those Spanish speakers.
Right.
It's like, what do you want? This is your space. Libraries are always publicly funded, so you're paying for 100% of what happens here. Whatever you want, to our limits, but we do potlucks, special celebrations. That's where ideas for different, celebrating holidays.
Right.
And that became my regular group. And then the promotion-wise, whenever I wanted to do a program, they would be my word-of-mouth kind of task people, and they would invite their families and their friends. So you'd end up with full programs, but we had that core, that social core that was learning. It was beautiful to see.
Well, and it sounds like, throughout this process, you're developing a kind of work philosophy, which is, it seems to be, you found that the primary driver for patrons showing up to any event seems to be the community, the communal aspect to it, rather than necessarily the, rap sheet of benefits, the facts that you're going to reap the benefits from. And I can see that in the way you work now is this very democratic approach to your engagement with staff, your engagement with patrons, and the notion that, if you let the people, quote unquote, decide, chances are you're going to see some really good fruits from that, just as a consequence of that.
You have the community help you build.
Yeah.
As smart as anybody is nobody has all the answers. Nobody has the best process on their own.
Yeah.
You have the things that you're good at that you can add to a process, but when you mentioned it, a democratic process is what that is for me, is just allowing everybody's best to be added to the effort, whether it's coworkers, staff, or just patrons and community members, partners. Everybody has something to add, and the best way to build something is when everybody put a brick in it. So I like the sense of ownership as well. Those students of my ESL classes had ownership because they built it.
Yeah.
That's why they didn't want to leave it. I try to get them to graduate, and they're like, no, I don't want to. This,
Yeah.
I built this with you. I'm like, okay, well, stay. We're public. We're here for you. I really love that.
Well, and I think even more than just like the effort involved in everything. I mean, it seems to be what ultimately provides social value to anything is each other.
Yes.
So if you have a well-established group of friends, acquaintances that have become friends over time, of meeting up at the same place, doing the same thing together, bonding over like experiences and like interests. You're going to see that as a consequence. I just say that to say, like, again, if you had to offer any advice to our current coordinators in that respect, I mean, is there any nugget of wisdom there that you'd like to impart to them?
Sure. I mean, the number one thing, though, the number one advice I'd give you is figure it out.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is what's inside of you. Your own creativity, your own ideas. Rely at first on what you're best at, and then learn to do the things that you're not best at in the process, but begin with the things that you're really good at.
Right.
For me, it happened to be building community. I'm not sure how it happened, but I mentioned that my first group of ESL students were these grandma age people. So and I was, at 30 or in my early 20s, as they treated me like their grandson, and that was the relationship. So you become very well acquainted. It's very friendly. It's almost a family. So I became good at becoming part of a community.
Yeah.
It's one of the things I guess I'm good at,
right.
And that's what I relied on. And I'm very good at being open and facilitating a democratic process, like you said. So if we have 15 people, I'm going to try to make sure that all those 15 people feel heard and that they have something to add.
Yep.
So my advice is look at what you're good at, start with that. And then when you're working with a difficult demographic, is identify who your key community members are. Whether it's teens or Spanish speakers, there's going to be a few of them that are these little shining stars that kind of become leaders. So I had that with both of those demographics.
Yeah.
With my Spanish speakers, with my ESL learners, it was these ladies who were quick learners, and in a couple of years were more proficient in the language, so people would look up to them.
Yeah.
And they would be the ones that organized potlucks, these neighborhood grandmas that kind of were matriarchs of their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
They bring other people, you become close, they become your confidants, they become your council of programs. So utilize that, identify who your key members are, and they make the whole wheel go for you.
Right.
Same with teens, you'll engage with some teens who are in clubs in high school. You were, God, it's been too long and I can't remember, but either cheer clubs or presidents debate clubs.
Right.
What do you call those really high achieving clubs? There's any leader of a peer group in a high school is going to be it, because they have this drive to lead.
Yep.
And they're your kind of keystones.
Yeah. Well, all right, in the interest of time, let's keep going, because we could stay on this topic forever. But how long were you in that role?
I'd say about 4 or 5 years. So my almost 20 years, I think it's 19, it's gonna be 20 years any day now. I think about 7 of those years was just general library work, and then the second half of that or the second third of that was split between Spanish and teens. So I'd say about 4 to 5 years each. Yeah. And then I've been in this event managing position for another 5 years. Yeah. I think most people have a good 5 years in the task before they want to move on to something else, right. Before they want to expand. So I think I would divide it that way. If it's 20 years, to keep it clean, I'd say 5 years general service, 5 teens, 5 Spanish, and now 5 more on the administrative program and networking kind of work that I do here.
Well, so there's a transition here. Let's just jump to the end of your 5 years at this district. How did you end up at GCPLD? I mean, what?
It was in the middle of COVID. Funny enough, I kind of got disillusioned with, it was December 2020, so it's still kind of in the middle. We don't know what we're doing. Right. And I feel like a lot of people wanted a change during that time. It was a good break. It was a time to say, is this what I want to keep doing? And I loved what I was doing. But the library I was in kind of did a full shutdown, and we were very resistant to virtual program or outdoors program. Okay. So I became disillusioned with inactivity. Okay. I've always had a drive to be in the community, and COVID was hard for that. But I felt that there was things we can do. So, one of the things is like, well, what are other libraries doing? Mm-hmm. Maybe it is time to, COVID was an easy time to move states. Mm-hmm. I saw this position open, a couple of other ones, and I said, oh, shoot, let's see what else is out there.
Well, on that note, though, so if there were other positions as well, did other factors play into just your decision to come here?
Well, my focus was on programming and outreach. So It was 2 libraries I applied to. One was in Golden. I just wanted to come to Colorado. One of my coworkers had moved to Gypsum. So he's still there in Eagle County. So I'm still close with him. He's one of the reasons I looked at this area. But like everybody else who moves to Colorado, you move here because it's so beautiful.
Was that it predominantly?
Not predominantly. Predominantly was the position. If I would not have found something that I really liked, I wouldn't have come.
Yeah. It was just a plus.
It was a plus, yeah. So in Golden, it was coordinator of their outreach services, which I have a fondness for. And then here was the programming and events manager spot. It just looked good. And then I saw that this library was engaging with virtual programming. They were getting out into the community even during that COVID shutdown, and that meant a lot to me. I wanted to go from a place that shut down to a place that was being proactive. Okay. I came in, there was already some wheels moving. I kind of just took over a basic system that we had, and in the last 5 years, I've seen it really, really grow with the help of everybody. Okay. And I've loved it. It keeps me engaged with the community. In 5 years, I've met a lot of key members of our community, maybe too many. I do think that I networked fast and hard, but that's because I love being a part of things. I love being a part of my community. And to me, that was also the best way to learn about it. I applied for the job December 2020, and by January 4th, 2021 was my first day. Okay. So it was like a 6-week turnaround going, hey, we're moving, moving states in a 6-week kind of decision. It was a good decision.
On that note, anybody who knows you, Alex, and you're kind of a prolific figure locally now, and you've only been here, what, 5
years?
COVID,
it's been 5 years in a month.
And I just probably chalk that up to that philosophy that you developed, philosophy of work, philosophy of life. For anyone who hasn't seen you around, which is unbelievable, but let's just, for the naive people out there, what outside of the library, what organizations, institutions, and initiatives have you participated in over these 5
That's
years?
a big list as well, but it does come with a caveat that everything I do outside of the library is related to the library. Okay. I started working in libraries at 19. It was my first really meaningful, I'm part of something. Yeah. I'm going to be 40 this year, so it's been my life. Libraries are my life, my professional life. I've understood their place in the community, and I also understand that to be a fulfilled person, at least in my perspective, you need to be part of your community.
Right.
You need to engage with it, help move some pieces.
Yeah.
I don't believe in just being a consumer. Now, I don't create anything. I am not a business owner. I am not an artist. I don't make things. But the way I see myself producing is by bringing community together.
Right.
So in that, I'm a board member of Raising a Reader, which is our local early literacy nonprofit. So it's a big one. I am in the board of our Chamber of Commerce in the Colorado Valley here from Silt to Parachute. I am in the board of one of our educational organic farms, which is High Water Farms outside of Silt.
Okay.
Then I'm in a couple of nonprofit committees as well, the Western Colorado Alliance, which works on different community campaigns. And then I engage with smaller committees for our school district, with the Aspen Institute as well. So I do have a pretty full docket, but it's all in the same subject line of keeping your community together,
right.
Addressing needs, and then somehow it all ties back to the library, which is my home base.
Yeah. It's so heartfelt. I don't know like where the sentiment comes from on your end, but I mean, anyone who's on the outside looking in just can't help but feel kind of amazed at how do you juggle it all?
You just do. You can call it being a busybody. I've never enjoyed having a quiet night at home.
Yeah.
Not to knock it. It's great, and a couple of times a week or something, I might have a night in watching a TV show or a movie, but
yeah.
I'm a believer that work is such a big part of your life.
Right.
In general, it takes, if you work full-time and only have one job, it takes 40 hours of your week.
Yeah.
And not just any 40 hours. It takes 40 of the most essential hours of your day, between 9 and 5. That's where life happens.
Yep.
I do have some feelings against that. I do think that our society makes us work the best years and the best hours of exploring our world. So I feel that whatever you're going to do for those 5 days a week, 40 hours, has to be meaningful. It has to feel like you're living.
Right.
I know this might be a little controversial, but I don't believe in the separation of work and life.
Right.
Because I'm not going to stop living 40 hours a week. What I'm going to do instead is integrate, I heard that term work-life integration, in which you're doing both.
Right, yeah.
Now, the flexibility I have with the kind of work I do makes it easier, and it's not possible for everybody. Yeah. But I would like to advise people that if you can, do something that you enjoy, do something that you love, do something that helps you as a human being, and not just as a consumer, not just as a cog in an industry.
Right.
And that's what I've done. That's what I've worked at doing. This is why community building is part of my 9 to 5, because I might be clocked in, but what I'm doing is, helping run a festival, or talking to nonprofits, or being on campaigns, helping businesses grow, kind of just making that community move is part of my 9 to 5. So I'm part of life as I'm working on it. I don't suspend it.
Yeah, and I think, it's important to hear from you also in the sense that, granted, as you admitted, not everybody has the schedule or the means to be such a change maker. What would you say to just the run-of-the-mill community member who does work a dead-end job, and just, I don't want to say a dead-end job, but like a 9 to 5 job, and they struggle reconciling the kind of monotony of their work with feeling a sense of purpose, and because someone's got to, I guess, sweep the streets, someone's got to stock the shelves.
That's right, and not just somebody has to do it, but the majority have to do it.
Yeah.
In order for our world to run, a huge portion needs to do that menial, everyday, monotonous work to make it run. But I would say is strive to find meaning in it.
Right.
Not to, a good example for me is a cashier at your Maverick, at your gas station. That seems like it's a monotonous job. You're at the cashier 8 hours a day. You might not feel that what you're doing is impacting. You might not feel what you're doing is fulfilling you. But man, have I seen some cashiers that just knock it out of the park. Yeah. You know, I've seen some. You walk in, they greet you, they learn their name if you're a regular. I've seen one that tosses a ball and plays fetch with patrons or with customers if they're waiting in line. They chit-chat. The meaning behind their work is making that mundane experience special.
Yeah.
And then you are part of your community.
Yeah.
You're not just ringing people up for their gas. You're learning their name, you're talking about where they're from, you're having these mini episodes of living.
Yeah.
If you work for UPS or whatever it is, a packing, Amazon packing plant, whatever it is, I'm sure that you can find a way to make your part meaningful. Your part is extremely important, it's essential.
Yeah.
But it's on you to make it meaningful.
Right.
And that's, other than really finding fulfillment and passions outside of those 40 hours a week, which is distressful. It's if you work 40 hours a week, now you need to find time to enjoy outside of that, but also find time to do the family thing. If you're raising a family, that's extra responsibility. Yeah. You don't want to lose yourself as a human because you have to work and you have to create a family and you have to provide for them.
True.
So the easiest, you can obviously find meaning in family. That's almost written in it. And if you're raising your family well, there's meaning there. Okay. The second part is the second thing that takes up your time, and work often takes more time up than family, is find meaning in that work so that you're fulfilled 24 hours a day. That's the thing, is find what makes you special no matter what you do.
Yeah, I think that is that whole concept of work-life integration that you're talking about. Is your identity isn't necessarily separated from what you do, right?
It's
Even
impossible.
if it is a menial job, right? If you approach it with with this notion of separation, it's going to manifest in the way you.
No, God, it's
work.
it's so much of your life. Your 9 to 5 is so much of your life once it's all said and done.
Right.
And to have separated yourself from that, to me, it's a crisis. It's a psychological crisis, especially for people who do not have that fulfillment and meaning in their work. It's there's two things: either find the meaning in what you do, or find something else that can give you that meaning. But you do not want to while that time away. Because again, being a cashier at Walmart, if you're there 10 hours that day, that's life.
Yeah.
That's life.
Well, the thing is, someone's got to do it, right?
And somebody's had to do it. So it's not going anywhere, but you hope that the people who are doing it are...
treat it with a community consciousness almost.
Yeah.
I think, just to bring it back to the library world, ratchet down the dome again, your role as it stands in this position, why don't you dive a little more into that?
Sure. So it's, in general, it's managing our programs. Anything that's a public class, a presentation, a festival, I oversee it. I have a ton of help compared to what it was when I started, which was during COVID time, and our staff was a lot smaller than it is now.
Yeah.
The day-to-day is planning programs, planning festivals, planning events, which runs from computer classes to author presentations, help with booking. There's a lot of logistic, administrative that works with it. And now I'm extremely lucky because in our 6 libraries, there are dedicated people. At the bare minimum, there's 3 dedicated people per library that do these programs. There's somebody that oversees and generates programs for their adult demographics, like general adult. There's one that does kids. There's one that does teens, and often there's one that does Spanish speakers. So I coordinate that. People check in with me to see what things they can try out. I'm connected to a lot of partnerships because of my board memberships and my networking and outreach efforts. So I facilitate, if somebody in one of our libraries says, hey, I want to do an organic vegetable program, which we have this Saturday, they'll ask me, hey, do you know anybody that can teach this? And I'll reach out to our college, reach out to our farms, reach out to different organizations and ask them, would you like to run this program? Or when we have concert artists coming in, I'm the primary contact for booking them in our library. So that's what the job is. The job is just overseeing, and now it's really just overseeing what those really cool frontline programming people do in the libraries. That's a role I used to be in. When I did Spanish programming and team programming, it's a role I miss very dearly, but I understand I'm in this next tier in which I have less direct contact with those patrons, but I am helping the people who do. That's a double-edged thing because I like what I do, but oh god, I miss being in that class, in that ESL class with those patrons and getting to know them. That's the one thing you lose when you climb to the next tier. But that's what the job is. The job is just helping the people that are hosting these programs.
So as the facilitator, kind of behind the scenes of the many programs, working with the coordinators that host them and run them. Are there challenges today that you think didn't exist working in your previous library district, or as a consequence of just societal change?
It depends. I think all of the same challenges still exist. Libraries, the 20 years I've been, have faced the same exact challenges. I don't even know if there's any new challenges, really. When I started almost 20 years ago, it was at the height of people saying books are disappearing, everything's going to be digital, who needs libraries? And that went the opposite way. But on that vein, we still have community members who don't see the value of a library, who have access, because of their economic status, have access to internet, have access to their own books. So the challenge is still serving the underserved and making sure that the underserved make it to the library, and that's difficult because of their economic, their transportation, their family lives, and then making sure that people who are better off see the value. We have issues with reaching out to difficult demographics like Spanish speakers, like teens. So those challenges have always been there. In each different community is going to face specific ones. So I wouldn't say that there's more or different ones. The different ones are because I'm now in Garfield County as opposed to a county in Arizona. The biggest challenge that we've faced here in the last 3 years are pretty well known, and these are a national resurgence of wanting to challenge library materials, and that kind of takes on a political spectrum. So the intellectual freedom and the freedom to read whatever you want is more under attack now than I've seen in 5 years, but it's always been there. Censorship has always been an issue. I think that is a stronger issue here and now than I've ever seen.
Right. Yeah. It's pretty bipartisan today.
It is. I'm sure that's become a challenge in just about any industry. It's the politics of things have just become not more. I wouldn't say more divisive. It's just more in your face, and it coincides with social media, keeping politics as the first thing you see every time you open up what should have been an activity to enjoy. I'm just going to scroll on Instagram to see fun things. That's become completely anti-fun because there's so many emergencies or things that seem like emergencies. So that kind of makes politics the most important thing about everything now, which is, I guess, a tragedy because it is not the most important things. But if people are being affected, there is urgency. Anyway, in Garfield County, right now with our local challenges on what materials we can keep on our shelves can be divisive. It always feels bad when your community is divided because we're one neighborhood,
right.
And people forget about the fact that we don't have to agree to be friends.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I'm so interested in community building, in networking, in knowing this person. To remind people that you're still one community, one entity, and agreement is not part of the contract of being a community. It doesn't need to get to a level in which you're disparaging or even a contest of ideas. Even though contests of ideas are wonderful, and I think they make us move forward, but it doesn't have to be in a negative.
I suppose in that vein, it's weird. As information has become more accessible, proliferation of the internet and social media, we've become more divisive, more divided. But at the same time, I mean, we demographically, geographically, run the gamut of the political spectrum. I'd say, just where we live. I mean, from Parachute on up to Carbondale, you'll find patrons that believe that hold beliefs all across that political spectrum. But I find that both on an internal level and on an external level, there's this impression that the library, caters towards one political demographic over another, and that's reinforced by, I think, some of the internal politics that go on in the library system, perhaps by, the nature of being, a tax-funded institution, one way or another, is going to land you being more defensive on one side of the political aisle than the other. And certain members of our community might look at this institution, libraries in general, as representative of or emblematic of the opposition that they're trying to fight against, politically speaking. Is there anything you have to say to them, like as far as
yes, and it's to answer something you said directly. So who does the library cater to? And I don't think the library caters to any side. That's a fact. I don't know what the perception is, but it is a fact because the library is for everybody. It doesn't cater to any group. Who it does cater to are people who are open and curious. If you are open to ideas, whether you agree with them or not, as long as you're curious about them, as long as you are a person who can see another human being and begin with their humanity first and their opinions and ideas second or third, that's who it's for. It's for people that can look across the aisle, any aisle, about anything, and just realize that we're one thing. There's one library. I think I steal this line from that movie titled The Public, which is about libraries. I think it's Emilio Estevez movie, but I'm not sure where the quote came from, but it is in that movie, and it's one of my favorite movies because it states that the library is one of the last democratic places in existence, and it might be the very last democratic place in our country. There's hospitals for rich and poor. There's parks for rich and poor. There's grocery stores, for rich and poor. And you know what I mean by that. There's everything. There's things that are accessible to a certain economic value. But if you want to pay $30 for an apple, there's a store for you. But if you can only afford an apple that's $1, there's a store for you.
Right.
There isn't a public library for rich and poor. There's universities and colleges for rich and poor, for crying out loud, which is crazy. The same as hospitals, but there is not a public library that is for the well-to-do. There is no public library that is made just for English speakers, or Native Americans, or immigrants, or white Americans, or black Americans. Your public library is for all of you. It's the last place that, we take Carbondale, for example, right? Carbondale, the library in Carbondale will have a millionaire sitting down next to somebody who could be homeless. And they're there for their own reasons, but they're there. It's the one place where the entirety of our society meets. And that's the value.
I agree. I think as a public institution, in such a divisive age, we need a physical institutional common ground.
It could be the last. I mean, the other examples are all virtual, right? So Twitter, Facebook, our big social media giants are democratic because they're for everybody. But in a physical sense, it's our library. There are no thresholds for accessing a library whatsoever. You don't even need a library card to come in. You might need one to take something home with you to borrow it, but our programs, our spaces, you don't need to be anybody or anything to use it. It's yours.
It's true. Truth. Well, we're running suppose just, Alex, I would say, as a man of and for the people, do you have anything you want to say to our patrons?
Just come to the library. That's what I'll say to all patrons. The way I like to put it is you're already paying for it, right? So libraries are publicly funded. That means your taxes are paying for what's already yours. Don't forget about it. It's very difficult to explain what a library is and what it does. And that's because we do so much. That's because somebody who is, middle-aged and has never really engaged with public libraries, you might not see the benefit because you have everything you need at home. But come check it out. Look at the programs we have. What you don't have at home is community. You might have family, and that's precious, and that's perfect. You might have access to information, but you do not have your community at large. Now, the other places you can find that, obviously, are churches, civic organizations you're a part of, your Rotaries, your Kiwanis, but the library is one of those. And the library is one that you don't need membership for, you don't need anything for. If you're a member of your church, quite frankly, you need to be a member of that faith for the most part. There is that threshold. A library does not have that. The library doesn't even need to know your name if you're not going to take anything home. So that's, if you're unsure about your place in your community, it's a perfect place to start.
Perfect. Love it. Thank you, sir.